But at this time, I would like to introduce Scott Quigley, former Army captain. Scott has led an airborne platoon and a ranger platoon, as well as serving as a company executive officer and a ground force commander over 4 deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan with both the 82nd Airborne and the 75th Ranger Regiment. Scott's the vice chair of operations for the Kennedy School Armed Forces Committee. He's a fellow at the Center for Public Leadership and is pursuing a joint MBA MPP degree. I'd like to ask him to come up now to introduce our guest speaker. As a JTAC, I usually know better than to give up the mic to a ground force commander, but in this case, I have no choice. So without further ado.
Make sure to give you my initials. Bale, thank you, and it is truly an honor that I'm going to be able to introduce our 2 guests here tonight, Professor David Gergen and General Stanley McChrystal. And I'm going to be brief, just because I want to give most of the airtime to them for their, and the question and answers that are going to follow. I just want to share just a few stories about my experiences with both David and with General McChrystal. First, we'll start off with David. Again, his resume is long, distinguished, and I would be remiss if I just went and listed it off. But again, he's our professor of public service here at the Kennedy School and the director of the Center for Public Leadership that has helped sponsor this event here at the Kennedy School. Senior political analyst at CNN, which we see him a lot on TV, and also obviously the White House advisor, senior advisor to 4 U.S. presidents. One line in his resume, though, that really doesn't get enough, that I don't hear enough in the media, and it's not his exceptional backyard volleyball skills that we've seen a few times. But when you're 6'5", David, I mean, it's not too hard, right? But all kidding aside, it's his time in service in the U.S. Navy. In some more private, smaller settings that I've had the privilege with David over the past year, it's the stories that he tells about his experience in the U.S. Navy, leading men and women in uniform, that really defined and were the foundation for his leadership the rest of his personal and professional life, all the way up to advising United States presidents. And that really has captured me as I've been here at Harvard and heard David speak. And that really speaks to Harvard's commitment overall, and we've heard this tonight, but I'll reiterate this message of, Harvard does not just welcome and support veterans here in our community just because it's the right thing to do. Harvard welcomes veterans into this community because they believe that the value, that we bring so much value into this community, both in the classroom and out of the classroom, the culture, the values and principles, and the experiences that we can bring to the academic environment and the cultural environment here at Harvard is why they welcome us with open arms and why we're having such an event tonight. Also, I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention other individuals other than David Gergen that provide this support. Professor Scott Snook here from the Harvard Business School, again, President Drew Faust, Harvard Kennedy School Dean David Elwood, are also around the Harvard community that provide this support for our experience here at Harvard. And now to our distinguished guest, General McChrystal. Obviously retired 4-star general. I don't need to go his resume as well. He's commanded at every level in the United States military. He's current co-founder of the McChrystal Group, and he works down 95 South and that other distinguished institution in Connecticut as a senior fellow at their Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. As I mentioned, he's commanded at every level. He finishes his career as the commander of ISAF and U.S. forces in Afghanistan. And just previous to that, he was commanding the Joint Special Operations Command, which is where I met General McChrystal and had the privilege of serving under his command. And I was looking for some quotes. I had a little green booklet that I had from my time in Afghanistan when he spoke to us, but it wasn't one of those Right in the Rain ones, so it's all smudged, so I just had to pick the ones I could read. But I did find some quotes recently from an author that spoke about General McChrystal's command of JSOC, and it reads, and I quote, "As head of the U.S. Joint Special Operations Command, McChrystal oversaw the development of a precision war machine unprecedented in the history of modern warfare, one whose scope and genius will be fully appreciated only in later decades once the veil of secrecy has been removed. Senior U.S. officials have gone on record stating that the joint efforts of JSOC NCAA paramilitary units were the most significant contributor to the defeat of al-Qaeda in Iraq. And without a doubt, there's clearly a lot of reasons why I think JSOC was so successful, and many of which is the people that served under McChrystal, the elite soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and their commitment. But we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about General McChrystal as a leader and the character and the culture that he honed in that organization. And I'll leave you with one story, and then I'll give both David and the general the mic. I was a platoon leader in Afghanistan, and we had conducted a very rare daylight raid to go after a high-value individual, and it was successful, but we also ended up losing one of our Rangers and had a handful that were wounded. And so we came back on the helicopters, very dejected. It was a tough day for our unit, and the first person that we saw when we landed in our small outpost in Afghanistan was General McChrystal. This was in 2008, and I remember the calm that was able to come over, sir, when you showed up with our unit, because it wasn't a good day for us. And I remember you shaking hands and even, I think, embracing one of our team leaders who was dirtied and bloodied. But your leadership there that day was resounded throughout the rest of my time with the Rangers. And I know in my young soldiers and Rangers that I worked with, that day lived in their memories forever. And it was this experience that underscores, I think, highlights what I most remember, and I think is the epitome of what a good leader is and what General McChrystal demonstrated, and that's that shared experience and that shared sacrifice. Good leaders like General McChrystal are the first ones out the door in an airborne jump. They're the ones that are doing the 30-mile ruck march with all the soldiers. They're the ones leading the way. And I feel like overseas, I can't count how many times I heard stories of platoon sergeants and first sergeants tell the story about General McChrystal showing up at Manifest when we're about to roll out on a mission with his sergeant major, and he'd join us on a platoon or a company-sized raid. Despite the danger that was ahead of us, he was right there with us, having that shared experience. And it really underscores that men in that organization would go to hell and back and follow Stan McChrystal because he was willing to share that hardship and that burden with him. And I think JSOC and all the organizations that he led, from his platoon back in the day until the forces in Afghanistan, was because he was willing to share that sacrifice. And sir, it was an honor to serve under you, and it's a privilege now to introduce you. I really enjoyed working for you, and I also want to say, I know legend has you only eat one meal a day. I appreciate you sharing that meal right now with us, and I'd love to welcome you and Professor Gergen up here to have a conversation. Thank you.
Good evening again. Thank you very much, Scott. And it is a rare privilege for us to invite and to have General McChrystal here. And I want to say a bit more general about some of the folks who are here to greet you, because you've heard about a number of them, and I won't go over that. But actually, we have some women, Megan O'Sullivan and Linda Belmas, who are both here sitting at the head table, have been enormously supportive of the armed forces, and both in active duty and as a veteran status. And I wanted to say a little bit more just about some of the students who are here, because this is really a night about the student veterans, and I just want to make sure that you have some sense of just the quality. You just heard from Scott, who was, of course, under your command. Let me just tell you about a couple of others. Andrew Kennard, and I want to ask him to sort of just be recognized, and let's hold your applause until after they're over. Andrew's here. You might wave to the crowd, Andrew. Andrew went to the Naval Academy and then went to Iraq, and he was on his first tour when he stepped on an IED, and since then he's had 75 operations. 75 operations. 76 on Friday. Whoa, you're counting too, aren't you? Yeah, I can imagine. but it has not slowed him down a whit. And he's here now as a joint degree student at the law school and the business school. He's enormously popular at both schools. Back in South Carolina, where he's from, I know a congressman said when he was elected, I'm holding a seat for Andrew Kennard if he ever comes back here. He may stop in New York on his way south. But Andrew, we're absolutely delighted that you're here. You're exactly the kind of veteran all of us want to recognize. I want to ask the others to stand if they would. Seth Moulton, who is here, who is a Zuckerman Fellow. Ann and I, my wife, who's here. I remember Seth when he was an undergraduate. He gave the Class Day speech in 2001. And asked, what is the call to greatness for our generation? Nobody was quite sure. And a few months later, we were hit by 9/11. Seth signed up for the Marine Corps, became an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, and went on the first wave into Iraq. Went on three tours there, and then came here to the business school. Started up the business school, the Kennedy School. He was finished, and then your friend General Petraeus was named commanding general for Iraq. And Seth was not alone, but he wrote a letter to the Marine Corps and said, I'd like to put my uniform back on, and went back and had a fourth tour. And he's gone on from there to finish now at the business school, the Kennedy School. He turned down Goldman Sachs to do a startup in Texas. He's come back here to do another startup, and he's under heavy pressure to run for the 8th District seat in Massachusetts for Congress. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But if you're interested, Graham Allison is going to give a fundraiser for him. Sign up with Graham. Come to his fundraiser. Seth needs it. Ashley Musser. Where is Ashley Musser? Is she here? There, Ashley, please stand. She graduated from honors from the Naval Academy. She went on to serve on board for several ships, including the USS Winston Churchill, which I was really pleased about. But she served all over the world. She's now in her first year at the Harvard Business School, star volleyball player, and was also a member of the student planning group that really put this event together. So Ashley, we appreciate you being here. And lest anyone think that all the veterans are in the graduate school. Someone mentioned we need more at the undergraduate level. Thomas Rubel, please stand, Thomas, so people can know who you are. This story, Seth was one who put me onto this story. It's really interesting because he served on our student planning committee. After finishing prep school, he could have gone anywhere he wanted. At 18, he enlisted, an enlisted man in the U.S. Marine Corps, right? And he became a sniper, which is one of the toughest jobs and one of those jobs that really leaves you quite damaged. But he got through it. He completed his service, and then he came here to Harvard as an undergraduate. And here's what's interesting. After being a sniper and coming as an enlisted, coming to Harvard, this next year after he graduates, Seth is going to be in a classroom with Teach for America. That's the quality of the young people we have here tonight. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all. Thank you. It's a remarkable story. So, General, we could talk in lofty terms, but let's talk a little bit about your personal journey first, about your journey to leadership, because this book, your book, which is a wonderful read, and Graham said it to you at lunch today, this is a book that everyone should read. It's a terrific read. Walter Isaacson put me onto this a few months ago. He said, this is the best book about leadership I've seen in a long time. And I must commend to all of you. The book is at your table. Read the epilogue. No one ever knows how to read the Bible in order, and our good friend Peter Gomes used to try to help us understand how to read the Psalms first. Read the epilogue first, because it's one of the best essays on leadership I've ever seen. It's really, really terrific. So let's talk a little bit about your personal journey. You had grandfather, a father, and an older brother, all military, right? Were they all West Point?
My father was. My grandfather was not. My brother went to Washington Lee University.
Aha. And but they all served, and there was a real emphasis upon service and upon heroism. And what struck me is when you were a young man, young kid, how much you read. You read biographies, you read history, you really liked T.E. Lawrence, you liked his biography, you liked John Paul Jones. What was that all about?
I had a mother who was had been raised a little bit as a tomboy, but she loved mythology. She loved the stories of the Scottish chiefs, William Wallace and whatnot. So she always pushed those kinds of books to me. And then as I got slightly older, I got into biographies of leaders like T. Lawrence and other military leaders, and many who weren't. And I just became very, very fascinated by the role of people who made an impact.
And so there was a time, then you went on to West Point. And this, I think, will resonate with a lot of folks in the audience. You're a real screw-off at West Point in the beginning. Tell us what 127 hours on the area means.
Yeah, I need to defend myself a little here. I wanted to be a soldier. My father was a soldier, grandfather, and my view of what I desired as a goal for me is to be an infantry soldier, which my father was. And so he had gone to West Point. To me, if you're going to be an infantryman, you go to West Point. But I viewed West Point as sort of this doorway you walk through and you go straight into the Army and you become an infantryman. Maybe a speed bump along the road to being a soldier. And West Point saw it completely differently. I really thought I'd get to West Point and then I'd sort of check my clock and 4 years it'd go through quickly. And I got a couple classmates here today. And West Point took itself real seriously.
And you didn't. You didn't.
No, I mean, it didn't seem very serious to me. I mean, the things that you had to do at West Point, theoretically, to learn leadership, didn't resonate. And so I rebelled against it for a couple of years, unsuccessfully. I mean, some rebellions get crushed. And I got caught, what it's called slugged, which is when you get a big, they call them a slug of hours on the area where you walk up and back on the area. Some of you have done that.
Very meaningful, right?
Yeah. The whole idea is that you accomplish nothing. You just burn. The one thing you never have at West Point is time. So I got in trouble 4 times in a row. And my last time, I was a yearling or a sophomore, and we got these weapons out of the museum. Real weapons that you're allowed to check out theoretically to learn how to use them. And so, yeah. And so we're sophomores, so we're playing war in the hallway of the barracks, and we're running around going bang, 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 and throwing socks as hand grenades. And because that was so much fun, we decided to have more fun. And we went outside to where you had a senior lounge in the next building, one of these august West Point-like buildings. Harvard's got some. It's all stone, and inside it's leather furniture, and it's polished wood, and seniors are trying to, make time with their dates in there. And so we burst in, 4 of us, carrying real automatic weapons, throwing hand grenades, and complete surprise. Great operation.
So how many hours did you get of marching for that?
Well, that one I think I got 20, but that was my 4th, and I was already up right near the edge of getting thrown out. So that the officer of the day, the officer in charge, they called him a captain, a real Army captain, who came around to check us that night, he caught us, and he goes, what are you guys thinking about? And he wrote it up in such a way that it was slightly humorous. And so I was the one who was close on demerits of the 4 of us. I was able to slide right under. And so if he'd written it up a different way, this is the meaning of words here, if he'd written up a different way, I'd have been thrown out.
Yeah, but in some ways, though, the high spirits that you had then really had a connection to the kind of courage and your capacity, your willingness to take on very difficult adventures later in life. I mean, you just had to get through that gateway, but you kept your spirit.
That's my theory. Robert E. Lee got no demerits in 4 years, and he did okay. But I tested that. I really did think it was important for me because I think if I knuckled under too much, I'm not sure that I would have felt quite the same about being an Army officer. And so I think...
Yeah. That's very much the John McCain story. I mean, he had a very similar kind of experience. So coming out of there, you got through, but did that cast a shadow over what you thought might be your career post West Point? Did you think you were maybe on a somewhat smaller arc, a lower arc, because of that?
No, it's interesting. I didn't. My last couple of years, I met my wife of now 35 plus years, almost 36.
Yeah, let's recognize Annie.
Yeah.
Annie, please, Annie. Yeah.
she wasn't going to put up with that. So we kind of got straight, and then I went into the service. But the thing that's interesting is I entered the service, and many of you experienced this I entered in 72, which statistically was the easiest year in West Point's history to be admitted, because West Point wasn't very popular, weren't that many people applying, so I got in. When I graduated in 76, the military was damaged goods. And so the service that I entered was not the service I'd seen in movies. It was not what I expected from my father's service. It was still torn by post-Vietnam issues, by drugs, by racial problems, and by lousy leadership. We had a generation of leaders, many of whom weren't very good. We had some great ones, but we had many that weren't very good. And so I came into this new profession desiring to be a soldier and a great soldier, and what I saw was way less than what I'd hoped. Mm-hmm. And dealing with that was sort of the first thing you deal with, because I think the first inclination is to go, well, this is not what they said it was going to be. This is not great. I'm out of here. And fortunately, peers I had and whatnot, we decided not to.
Who do you give credit to? It's a really important chapter that many who are younger here haven't really experienced. But after Vietnam, the Army really was demoralized, and it was in terrible shape. Angry at the press for what they thought for losing Vietnam, bitter in many ways. It could have really gone. It could have spiraled down, and yet there were people who turned it around. And what do you think happened there? I know that you were a little young for that, but there were people just a little older than you who turned it around.
There were some very senior leaders, general officers like General Depew and others, who came out and said, we're going to change the focus of the Army, and they realized it was broken. So they started to change a number of things like leadership. The first thing they did was change selection of battalion commanders. Many of you know how important battalion commanders, back in Vietnam, they served for 6 months and they weren't centrally selected. They were sort of, hey, you want a battalion, here you go. They changed it to a battalion commander serving at least 2 years and centrally selected by a board to have some kind of process to pick the best. And if you turned down battalion command, that ended your career. So it put new focus and responsibility on leaders. They also focused on a series of weapons systems, and that was to give us the Abrams tank, the Patriot missile, and the Apache helicopter, things like that. But more importantly, they changed the way the Army trained. And they went to something called performance-oriented training that was based upon the ability to execute. We take it for granted now. Now we have an organization and we want it to do something. We train it to do that, and we demand it be able to do that. It was revolutionary in the early 70s. The idea that we're actually going to, that's what we're going to rate you against. And at the same time, technology allowed us to open things like the National Training Center, a big desert training center at Fort Irwin that used laser technology. And it was the first
California.
time. California. This was the first time you could have force-on-force training and really told who won and lost. Wasn't perfect, but it changed it so dramatically that I came in and, I graduated in summer 76. And by the time I came home from Korea in the spring of 82, the Army was already a different place. You had a different feel to it, a different sense of leadership, a different sense of purpose. And it wasn't the additional money that was pumped in. I mean, that helped, but it was shaking off a hangover of Vietnam with the leadership of a number of people.
Yeah, which really does suggest, and I don't want to divert over here, but it does suggest that we have all these civilian institutions and systems that are broken, say K-12, that you're not saddled with this forever. People with strong leadership can turn these around. It is possible to do. You've seen it in your own career.
Absolutely, but it's rarely a single thing. You're changing a culture of how the organization operates. And I think we changed that dramatically in the Army. And it was funny, the culture changed. Nobody stood up and said, we're going to change the Army's culture. At least I didn't hear that. But we did change the Army's culture. And then things like drug use, that was the time we started urinalysis. All of these things intersected. And suddenly you went from a system where when I was young, you had to beg people to re-enlist to be in the service. By 1984, we had a board in my battalion where people would apply to be allowed to re-enlist for an additional tour, and you boarded them and you selected the best could re-enlist. The rest got forced out of the Army. It was a 180-degree change enabled by some other things, but pretty valuable.
Yeah, well, let's, in the interest of time, I'd love to, because you had some ups and downs in your career, and there were times you had to learn humility. There were times that things didn't work out for the assignment you wanted, the promotion you wanted didn't work out. You and Annie had to work your way through a lot of that. But I want to move on in the interest of time to the big change you had to bring. You talked about this at the Belfer Center today with Graham and others about what you inherited when you went to special operations. As Graham said today when he introduced him, in many ways General McChrystal is the father of special operations in the U.S. military. And it's been a huge change in what we do, capabilities, and the way we conduct the warfare against terrorism. And this is the guy who inherited something that wasn't working and turned it around. And that transformation is what I'd really like you to focus on here for a few minutes. Just open it up. Let us hear about it.
Sure, absolutely. I had grown up much of my career in the Ranger Regiment. I'd been in regular special forces when I was younger. And you get inculcated with a culture, and you get to know people, and you feel very strongly about it. And that culture was excellence. Now, it's interesting here because the culture of excellence is, our definition was excellent performance of a process. We defined what it took to be good, shooting well, doing well on certain things, and excellence became the Holy Grail. And we were excellent. When we trained for missions, you remember the Israelis went to Entebbe and they basically invented the airfield seizure. In the Rangers, we then did it for the next 25 years. We did thousands of them, and we got great at it. It became this unbelievable ballet in which we could go into an airfield completely blacked out, seize it, and be gone in 90 minutes. I mean, it's extraordinary, but we never once did it in combat because we never had that requirement later. Instead, what happened is we had this culture of excellence that started into the post-9/11 fight in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I took over, I returned to Special Operations in October of 2003. Many of you remember the initial invasion of Iraq. It looked like it had gone very well, and then things started to get worse and worse. When I got to Iraq in October of 2003, it was bad and getting worse very, very quickly. And it was obvious it was about to get a lot worse. We were hitting targets. We were being excellent. We were doing a limited number of raids, and every time we did it, our level of precision and execution was great. So we're great, and we're basking on our excellence, but the situation's getting worse. The spring of 2004, first Fallujah attacks, meltdown occurs. We're fighting harder and harder. We're hitting more targets. We're feeling good about that. By August of 2004, just my little force was hitting 18 targets a month. Every other night we're doing a raid, which was really fast for us. Yet the situation's getting worse and worse. And we had a come to Jesus moment, a realization that being excellent doesn't equal success. And our culture of the pursuit of being excellent in our definition didn't sync with what it was going to take to be successful in the war. So we started throwing that out. We started throwing out how we operated. Our insular, secretive nature, our guild-like culture that didn't encourage us to work with others had to be knocked down. And when I say that, it's easy for me to say we're going to change culture, we're going to knock down walls, we're going to have people cooperate. That's really hard to do when people have grown up in that, and that has been their definition of success, because you are asking people to let go of the side of the pool and potentially drown while you're trying to get them to swim. So it's an assault on that, and more, it's an assault on my leadership, because I've never led in a different way like this before. I'd grown up in a system and been fairly successful in that search of excellence, and I could micromanage something to death. And I was good at that. But suddenly I realized, but that's irrelevant, because we're losing. And here's the bottom line. That's all that matters. You got to win. You got to accomplish whatever it is your mission is. So we started changing dramatically. Just to give you a sense, August 2004, we did 18 raids with our force in Iraq. August 2006, 2 years later, same 30-day period, 31-day period, we did 300 raids in a month. Now think of that. from an organization, that's like you put a dinner like this on once a quarter, let's say, a fairly big dinner for us. Suddenly we go to the point where we're doing it several times a month, and that's hard, and people are working hard. Suddenly you're doing 10 a night. Everybody goes, you can't do that. That's essentially what we did. What Scott Quigley and the others experienced was us changing from one entire mindset of how we operated to a completely different one. And that mindset caused us to share information constantly. I mean, aggressively share information. There used to be a culture that said, who needs to know? To one now is everybody needs to know, and only don't share by exception, which has its dangers. It has its dangers by security, but it also has its dangers just by maturity. I started leading by a daily video teleconference that went 90 minutes across the whole command, and I would think out loud. People would throw something to me, and I would just say, here's how I process that.
How many people on the call?
There were, by 2005, there were several thousand.
Several thousand people on a 90-minute call?
A video teleconference call.
And it was classified?
It was classified top secret.
Whoa.
It had people in D.C., it had people in all these different embassies, it had people across Iraq, people across Afghanistan, 90 minutes every day. And we're doing this, and so you say, well, this is great. We can communicate to everybody, which we could. We can push out information, but you also can lead because we're across 27 countries, and I can't go touch everybody every day. And so suddenly you got to try to use digital techniques to do that. And it's hard, but it's possible. And so what I learned to do was, one, have a cheat sheet with everybody's name, who's briefing, and you reach out. If somebody briefs you, one, you pay close attention because they're seeing you. They see body language. You also ask questions. A young person would brief. The first thing you do is ask a question because that shows you paid attention, and it shows what they do matters. And then every once in a while, they're kind of nervous. They're briefing a 50-plus-year-old general, so, they're kind of like, they just want the damn thing over with. And then, I'll ask a question, and they'll get through the question, and I'll say, hey, great job, and they'll feel pretty good about that. And I go, hold it. What do you personally think about that? Now you got 22-year-olds going, oh, shit. This guy has asked me a question on my opinion, and I don't have an opinion because I'm 22. But think about it. It changed the dynamic between people in the organization. And when I processed and spoke out loud or thought out loud, it let everybody judge how well I thought, which in my case is dangerous. But you know what I found? I found people didn't hold me to a high standard of being smart. They didn't hold me to a high standard of being an expert. What they held me to is a high standard of caring and being willing to listen and being willing to learn. And as long as I could do that, as long as I could ask questions, pay attention, and listen, then I got the benefit of the doubt. And at the end of the day, that's what mattered.
But the traditional notion of leadership is that of authority, and you have to be sort of know more than you have to have all the answers. And what you're saying is you had to give that up. You had to show that you didn't know all the answers and empower others to help you find them.
Yeah, if you think about it, in a lot of military situations, traditionally the senior leader has an office, has got a person out in front of the office, secretary. We used to call them moat dragons in the Pentagon, and that's to keep people from getting into the great person. Because you don't want information in there because it confuses decision making. But you think about it, you've got somebody who makes sure you're in the right uniform, makes sure you've got talking points, sets you up so that when you get in the room, you are as polished as you can be, and you've got this facade around you that paints you in the best possible light. I mean, think about it. CEOs and other university presidents, all that's a temptation. But the reality is, when you're not the expert, people are going to figure that out. Somebody taught me not too long ago that said people will forgive you for not being the leader that they'd like you to be, but they won't forgive you for not being the leader you claim to be. And so what I found is I'm dealing with young Rangers and commandos and SEALs that are operating with equipment and tactics on operations I'd never done. We didn't have Predators when I was younger. We didn't have the same radio equipment. We didn't have any of that stuff. So they are fighting a fight I'd never fought. So who am I to go tell them how to fight it? Which brings into question, why are you in charge? I said, because I'm older than you. But it really does. It brings, so what is my value added? My value added is to create an environment where they can be successful. It's not to tell them what to do because I don't know what to tell them to do. It's not to limit what they do. It's to allow them to be effective. It's to create a situation where they have their confidence and their competence grown so that they can do it. And it pays off because they give you credit for that.
So to a significant degree, you centralized information, but you decentralized execution.
Exactly. Nobody could own information. There was no ability to have our information that we only share in bits. The more we knocked it down, we said all information belongs to everybody. We had a wrestling match with one of the intel agencies for a while because we wanted to get specific signals intelligence information. They said, well, we want to give you intelligence reports, which is the finished version. We'll get the intercepts. We'll tell you, we'll analyze it. We'll tell you what it means. I said, I'd love to have you give us the finish, but I also want the raw stuff so we can figure out what we think it means as well. But that challenges their position because if you do it yourself, then what's their importance? The reality is it's good to do it both ways because they are value added, but it knocks down traditional equities. And every time you push against walls of equities, you get basically resistance, mostly middle management.
So a great deal of the success of this system, the willingness of others to act on what you're asking them, depends on trust, credibility. What did you learn about what makes up credibility?
Yeah, it's something that we all sort of know, but at some point, I think it was 2004, 2005, I finally wrote it out as an equation. And the first thing, our command to be effective needed freedom of operation. We needed people to let us do what it is we thought we needed to do. And there were a lot of constraints early. And I came to the realization that freedom of action came from credibility. If people believed and trusted you and your command, you had it. But then I wrote out what I came to the conclusion on what credibility was. Credibility was a mathematical equation for me. It was proven competence, the ability to do what you say you can do. It was integrity, being absolutely honest about everything. And it was relationships. And those three things, if you focused on those three things, you're going to build up enough credibility to be able to do what you need to do. Now, those three things are all hard to do. But they are your centers of gravity. They're the crown jewels that you have to protect. If you ever endanger people's view of those three, you can't make progress.
I'd like to ask you about two more things and then go to the floor. The relentless pursuit of Zarqawi, and you know, many of the legends about you are about the way you worked with your troops and you were out there in the field. It was almost like Henry V on the night before Agincourt, that you were out there talking to the troops and getting their opinions. Tell us a little bit about that pursuit, the success of it, which was one of the great, stories. Maybe not Zero Dark 30, but it's very close.
Sure. We had been after Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who had risen to be the leader of al-Qaeda in Iraq, basically from about late December 2003 until he was killed in the summer 2006. He was the leader. He was the iconic leader. He was also the practical leader that made al-Qaeda in Iraq work. He tied together Sunnis who were scared and willing to uprise with foreign fighters and other things. So he was running a network that was effective, and he was the main energy behind it, now, although not the only energy. We'd been after him for a number of times, and in February of 2005, we'd almost gotten him. We'd had a predator over him. We'd figured out he was in a car, and then when we changed the focal length to the camera, the car stopped. He got out, and we didn't see it. We got the car. We got his weapon. We got his computer. We didn't get him. And it started to be this very frustrating chase. It was more like police work. We did hundreds of operations to get him and to destroy his network. But finally, in the spring of 2006, we started to have a sense that we were beginning to close in on him. We captured a video in April of 2006 that had him, and you've probably seen parts of it. He's out at this area that looks like it's been dug up and there's some berms, and he's dressed in all black looking like a terrorist leader, and he's firing a U.S. squad automatic weapon on full automatic. And we capture this through some cyber work we did, and we capture the full video, and he's going to use this for a propaganda video. And we look at the full video, and so he puts this full video out a week or two later, and it shows him shooting and being macho leader. Right after that, we put out the full video with the outtakes, which showed that instead of just showing him firing the squad automatic weapon, it jams, and he has to stand there and have a guy come help him unjam it. Then he hands the squad automatic weapon after firing a lot of ammunition out of it. He hands it to one of his buddies, who hands it to another, who grabs it by the barrel. And so you see this sort of, Gomer look, and they look like the gang that can't shoot straight. And so we put it out immediately to see if we could get a rise out of it and to undercut him. Well, in April of that year, also that same month, we hit a target outside of Baghdad in Yusufia, and we captured 12 Iraqi men, not real young, and it was at a rural area, and there was only one cell phone amongst them. And they weren't farmers, and when you capture 12 Iraqi men at a target and only one cell phone, something's wrong. It's easier to capture one Iraqi man with 12 cell phones than vice versa. So they either had not brought them on purpose, or they had thrown them in a canal behind the house. And we'd done a raid earlier that night, not far away, but seen this and hit them. We policed these 12 guys up, and we started talking to them over a series of days and days. And finally, at first, we realized all of them were al-Qaeda sub-commanders. And we tried to figure out which one's the most important. And finally, we got to one that we were convinced was important, but we couldn't confirm it. And we kept him for weeks. And when I described it, interrogation, it's not like people view it. It's not like 0 Dark 30. We sat and talked to him day after day. In fact, his two interrogators did movie night with him one night. Kind of like, let's take a night off, let's watch a movie. And so the three of them sat and watched his favorite movie, which was The Exorcist. Hey, go figure. Finally, we're working with him over and over. We're watching his brother. His brother disappears. We tell him his brother's left country, and we look at him and we go, hey, we're going to have to send you to regular population, because if you can't help us, you're going to have to go. And one of the two interrogators walked out of the booth and went to get the guards, and the other looked at him and said, listen, you got to help us now or you're going in.
What, going in where? I understand what that means.
Oh, into Camp Bucca, which is the big 20,000 person detention facility where most Iraqis went.
Where sure exactly he didn't want to go.
Well, he didn't want to go there. It's like going into San Quentin. And we'd never get any more intel out of him, but he didn't want to go there. He also goes into the Iraqi criminal system then. So we said, we can't help you. We're just going to do that. And as he realizes we're going to do that, he stops and says, stop. I got something to tell you. It turned out that he knew who Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's spiritual advisor was. This was a guy who met periodically, about once every week to 10 days with Zarqawi. And so we were able to find him in Baghdad and follow him for about 3 weeks, every minute of every day, using overhead, sending guys in cars, our people undercover, watching him, photographing him, waiting for him to make this move to go find Zarqawi or to go meet with Zarqawi. And finally, one day, we see him make a move to move his family to another house, which we were told by the detainee that's what he did right before he went to see Zarqawi, so somebody would watch his family while he's gone. And he'd be gone a day or so. As we watched this, we went in and asked the detainee, who said, yep, that's what you'll see now. Tomorrow he'll drive out of the city and go meet Zarqawi. So full surveillance. He gets up in the morning. He's got a driver. He drives out of the house. We're watching him every second. He drives around Baghdad and comes back. And we go, uh-oh, what's this? He was clearly doing a counter-surveillance route. He waited a little bit, then he got in the car again, and they took off north. The guys came and got me immediately. He said, sir, he's leaving the city. He's going north. And I said, north? I thought he'd go west, but stay on him. Suddenly, the car he's in pulls off to the side of the road. He gets out, and the car just drives on, right on the shoulder of the road. And about 20 seconds later, another truck comes up smoothly, stops, picks him up. And they drive off, which was a pre-planned trade craft to avoid surveillance. It was really pretty impressive. Then he went to a up to Bakaba to like a corner restaurant, went in one door, came out another door, got in another kind of vehicle. We were able at this time to know him well enough from the air. We followed him, and he finally goes to a house in a place called Hib Hib outside of Bakaba, which is it's like a nice suburbs with a row of houses with a palm grove behind them. And he pulls into the driveway, and we see a guy come out and greet him and then take him in the house. We're watching, trying to figure out, is this the meeting? And suddenly the guy who greeted him walked back out, walked down the driveway, looks left and right like to see if the coast is clear, and the guy's dressed in all black. Looks like just like Johnny Cash. And the guys came and got me, and they brought me in immediately about two, because we recorded everything in real time. And I saw that thing, and I said, that's Sarkawi. And they kind of go, no shit, boss. I mean, we've been after him for 2.5 years. And I'm sort of, we got to do something. And, of course, we'd already started a raid force to get him. We ultimately decided to bomb the house because we couldn't get a raid force there quickly enough. And we were able to kill Zarqawi. But it took 2.5 years. The next night I went down to the squadron who had run the operation, and I gave one medal after all of this. And the one medal was to a slightly disheveled-looking master sergeant intel guy who didn't go on targets, didn't kick down doors, didn't shoot people, but he had been the energy. He'd been the moral force that had kept this organization focused for so long. And I think everybody appreciated the fact that we recognized the person, even though he wasn't the typical hero, he was the hero of the story.
And what a story it is. Let's go to the floor. Question, do you have a microphone? Can somebody, yeah, please.
Hey, sir, thanks so much for your talk tonight. My name is Peter Brooks. I'm a joint degree student here at the Kennedy and Business School and a former Marine. I just wanted to actually follow up on the way we finished up the panel, the IOP panel tonight was to talk about service more broadly for the rest of Americans. And sort of the two questions I have are sort of what can we, I think a lot of us here at grad school are wondering how we can continue to serve those in uniform or some of the enlisted folks that we know they're out looking for jobs. And then also how, in what ways can we best sort of instill a sort of sense of civic pride that we got when we were in the service that maybe other Americans don't have a feel for?
Yeah. Hey, Peter, thanks, and thanks for being here tonight. I think the first thing we have to change is the culture of service in America. You know, right now, and we sort of talked about it in the thing tonight, people would say thank you for your service, and I think most people feel a little uncomfortable with that. They feel uncomfortable because, one, they chose to serve, and the second is it sometimes feels like somebody's thanking you as though they feel bad they didn't serve, almost a feeling of guilt. Whether that's right or not, it feels that way. I think we've got to change the culture in America to be an expectation of service. And what I mean is it doesn't all have to look or feel the same, but that expectation of what you do for society ought to be something that everybody just takes as a given. You know, I describe to people, I'll be happy when people go to a cocktail party and someone goes, so where'd you serve? And they don't mean just military. And if you got nothing to say, you look at the floor and you feel very uncomfortable to be there. But if you've got an immediately response, I did Teach for America, I work this, I work that, and everybody goes, okay, great. One, it establishes a linkage between people. And second, it is, of course you did. And I like the idea that nobody would consider running for political office because they couldn't stand the heat of someone saying, why didn't you? And if they said, well, the military wasn't for me, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be military. And so I think that's one of them. I think what we can do is start to propagate that. Service is not a moral high ground that the people who've served are on. It's not something that you should take and leverage and, you know, I'm holier than thou. Service should be something that we start to build into. It's really good to serve. One, it feels good. Two, it makes you better. And I think most of the people in this room know that you're going to get a direct payoff from your service. It's not going to be a free dinner or anything like that. It's going to be a better sense of self. And so that's what I think the key is. Thanks, Peter.
Yes, sir. There's another microphone right down here. Just to make sure. Please go ahead.
Hey, sir. Mike Foster. I'm a National Security Fellow. We talked earlier today about sometimes the unintended consequences of action in both Iraq and Afghanistan, forming scar tissue waking up in the morning and we realized we'd formed unintended alliances. For a lot of people in this room that have served forward, we may not appreciate our activities the way Iraqis and Afghanis appreciate our activities. For us, it's a normal day. But for a young child, that's a life-changing experience when they have interaction with an American. What seeds do you think we have sown in Iraq and Afghanistan that will bear fruit or poison, 10, 15, 20 years from now? And what do you think the United States needs to do to cultivate that crop when it comes of age?
Yeah, I'm going to start with the negative and then I'll come to positive. We've certainly sown some seeds that disturb the world. And the idea that we don't recognize sovereignty as sacred as many countries do, that's a problem. I think there's a sense that we don't understand the nations in which we operate. We don't speak the languages and we don't take the time to figure it out. That's a problem, and we're going to pay for that. I think there's a sense that we are willing to use our technology before we use our people, although it makes logical sense. It's not something that's deeply respected, particularly in a warrior culture. They don't say, hey, great UAV, I admire that. They go, if you're a man, get down here and look me in the eye. And that matters. So I think there are some negative seeds that we have sown we're going to have to work our way through. And then, of course, aberrations like Abu Ghraib, whether or not they reflect reality for the larger force, they reflect what a lot of people viewed as reality. And so that caused a lot of scar tissue that grew and we paid a big price for. Now, on the other side, though, we changed some things that we're going to get positives out of. In a place like Afghanistan, we empowered females to move forward. And even though it may get more difficult after 2014 for females, they're not going back to where they were. There's just not going to be a willingness to do that. We opened some doors for opportunity for people, young people in Afghanistan, to go to school and things like that I think are also irreversible in many ways. I think in Iraq, as painful as that has been, it's a troubled democracy, but it is a democracy now. And so out of the shadows of Saddam Hussein, they're going to have to work their way through that. There's an expectation there that people have a say in what happens. And it will probably be a twisted course to get to where we want. But I think that's opened. I think there's an expectation, people have an expectation that they didn't think was possible before. We may not get thank you notes for it, but there will be some real positives. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, last question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Tim Barrett, National Security Fellow. Just curious, in the span of your career and service to country, if there's one or two leadership traits or principles that have really guided you throughout.
Yeah, I think the first one is empathy. And what I mean by empathy is, and I don't want people to confuse it with sympathy. Empathy means you try to understand how the other person feels. It means you try to understand what it's like to walk in their shoes, what it's like to see through their eyes, what it's like to live their life. And it doesn't mean you can change it. It doesn't mean you can be it. It doesn't mean you can reach down and carry the soldier's rucksack for him, because you can't. But what you can do is you can understand what it's like to be the private in the back of the platoon in a night movement when everybody stops and the word gets back, but the private doesn't hear what's going on. So you're up there, your mind's racing because you're figuring out what's going to happen. All he's doing back there is carrying a heavy load, stopping every 100 meters, wondering if you're lost. And if you can learn to empathize with that, we went on an operation one time where we rounded up some Iraqi men. It was a difficult operation outside Ramadi, and we laid them down on the ground to do the search. And there was about a 4-year-old boy that came and lay down next to presumably his father. And I suddenly realized what I'd feel like if I had been laid down by foreign troops, hands behind my head, and my 4-year-old son's watching, and then he comes, lies on his stomach next to me like a detainee. The rage in me would have exploded. And so to empathize, to understand the effect of how people feel when you do things is really hard, but I think that's the first
What'd you do?
thing. In that case, of course, we stood the kid up. We'd already, I think, done the damage with the men. I don't think we actually detained them. I don't think they were guilty. We searched them and did our thing. But I walked away saying, we could lose this war. Because we do this, we check them and we go, this is what you got to do in warfare. You got to check people and all. But for a short period of time, we humiliated that father in front of his son. And it's going to be very hard to come back the next day and say, you got to love us because we're here to liberate you. So that's kind of the first one. The second one is the other thing a leader has got to be the force in an organization. Organizations get tired, they get scared, they get frustrated, they get all of those things that make it hard for the organization to continue on in the direction it has to go, particularly if it's change. The leader's got to be that force, got to be that energy, got to be the person that says, we are not stopping here, we're not going halfway across the river, we're going all the way across the river. And it's hard to do because you get just as tired, just as frustrated, just as scared as everybody else. But that's what you do. They're going to carry the loads. They're going to fight the fight. They're going to do all that. You are that moral force that understands that you know how tired they are, you know how scared they are, but yet you can keep the organization moving forward. And that is the gift of a really effective leader.
General, I think I'd be remiss if I did not raise one last point. A veteran made to me tonight, and he said, I've always admired General McChrystal, but I've particularly admired him since he faced adversity, since he stumbled, because the grace he showed, the dignity he showed, the way he's come back, the way he's continued to serve, the way he's sought other forms of service, has made him not only more admirable but more human to me. And it was just something that I just thought you ought to know that. I'm just curious how you think about that now, because it seems to be one of the great, we have so many people come to Harvard who've never fallen before, but they will. Everybody does. And I'm just curious how you reflect on that now.
Yeah, it's you reflect on it every day. It's not something that happens. When the Rolling Stone article came out, I was surprised by it. I was upset by it. I didn't believe that it was true or accurate, but I'm in a position where you got this swirl, and I thought the only thing I could do was offer my resignation. I didn't know enough of the facts because I didn't know all the background of the story. And as you remember, there was this explosion. And so I came and offered my a resignation because leaders accept responsibility, and I think that's the right thing to do. I didn't really have any doubt about doing that. Now, it's easy to say and do that. It's even easy to hand in your resignation because it all happened kind of quickly. I came home that day, and Annie was waiting at the door, and I had to tell the little girl who had been married to me for 33 years that everything about her life was about to be turned upside down. It's going to go at right angles. We're going to lose our job. We're going to be forced out of our house. Everything that was moored us to who we were, me as a soldier, her as an Army wife, was cut. Not only was it cut, on the TV, I'm on the ticker every minute for the next few days, and it's not positive. And people are writing articles that opine about this and opine about that, many of which were not very informative. It doesn't matter. They write them, and if you haven't read them or had your family read them, it hurts. So you got to make a real big decision. I had to make a real decision at that point. Okay, how am I going to deal with it? And I made the decision that I couldn't change anything about the past, and I wasn't going to try to fight that. I could decide the future. And I could decide what I did every day in the future. And my litmus test was, how could I conduct myself so that the people that had believed in me before, many of whom are in this room and very important to me, I wanted them to admire me like I hoped they admired me before. And I wanted them to watch how I carried myself every day. And that became the great motivator. But I'll tell you, every day you get up and you want to be angry if you think you were wronged. Every day when somebody brings something up, you want, your stomach does this. Every time somebody writes an article that says, Stan McChrystal who was fired because he criticized the president or whatever, whether that's a completely incorrect statement, doesn't matter. Every time you read that, it does it again. Now, it does it a little bit less each day, but it does it again. And every time you think that your honor and loyalty is doubted, that hurts. And every time you realize your father and your brothers and sisters and your wife and son are reading that, it affects you. So what every day you have to do is you have to get back up again and you have to go, I am not going to back off what I said I was going to do. Every day I'm going to try to be the person that I hope I am. I'm not. I'm not as good a leader as I want to be. I'm not as good a person as I want to be. I get mad. I get frustrated. I do all the negative things in the world. But every day, it's like John McCain writes about being tortured. You get broken. You don't stay broken. You have to come back and try to start again every day. You're all going to have some failure in your life. You're going to get divorced. You're going to go bankrupt. You're going to get fired. You're going to do something stupid. You're going to have something. But if it defines you, then you lost. If it doesn't define you, then I think maybe you didn't lose. I mean, the fact that I get to sit next to one of the icons I've admired my whole life, the fact I get to be in this room, the fact that I can come back here and I'm not embarrassed to be back at Harvard, to me is, it's a big river I crossed. And so, I appreciate the chance to be here.
General, we're honored that you're here. Thank you.
General, I want to thank you very much, and if I may ask Mrs. McChrystal to please join us up on the stage here for a moment. So we know the power behind every good man is a good woman, so I appreciate you joining us on stage. We've heard stories about when you were a fellow here, you and your wife enjoying many a Boston Red Sox ball game from the cheap seats. So our gift to you today, should, you guys can go ahead and open that so we can see what it is. But it ought to be a good tool for you to come back and visit us at some point and enjoy a Boston Red Sox game on the Center for Public Leadership and the student veterans of Harvard. And we hope that you won't be a stranger, General McChrystal. Thanks very much for coming tonight. And again, we hope you come back again and enjoy a game on Center for Public Leadership. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You don't get to go yet.
I know the Red Sox are here, and I just want to say my arm feels good. So give me a call.
Thank you, sir. Thanks very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, I put my podium away, which I knew would be a bad thing. Please actually remain standing if you don't mind. I'm now going to call Dan McConnell up to the podium. Dan spent 9 years in active duty service, deploying to Iraq twice as a rifle platoon leader and then a battalion adjutant with the 10th Mountain Division. He was later selected as a psychological operations officer and deployed in command positions to Haiti and Afghanistan. He's my co-chairman for the Kennedy School Armed Forces Committee. I'm glad to have him. We got the Army-Navy balance going, so that's good. He's an MPP candidate at the Kennedy School, and I'm going to hand the mic over to him. Luckily, his time to the mic is short, so his PSYOPs propaganda should not have time to embed in your brains.
All right, thanks, Bill. So at this time, I'd like to open up the floor to formal toasts. Bill just left, but I got you a refill because I know you finished your glass earlier. But if everybody would make sure that your glasses are still charged with the port. And I'd like to propose a toast to the great nation that we serve, the United States of America.
deployed and their families.
I do have a toast. As you entered the ballroom, you may have noticed that before tonight is an empty chair and a single lone table draped in black, signifying our fallen comrades who could not be with us tonight because they gave the full measure of devotion to the country. A single lighted candle represents the flame of eternal life and reminds us that they are with us in memory always. The Purple Heart Medal to show the shedding of blood and the ebb of life in battle. The name tags blank yet they could bear the name of many of us in this room tonight. Our comrades are not here, but they dine with us in spirit. To our fallen comrades. To our comrades.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you very much to our toasters. Please go ahead and take your seats. I appreciate your patience tonight. If I was trying out for the green team of the 160th, I would have failed hours ago. But thank you again. I have a few more people to thank, which I'd like to do before calling up Father Hare for our benediction tonight. I'd like to thank our piper, Jonathan Bloom. Thank you very much, sir. And I realize, actually, if we could keep the lights, if we could turn the lights back down, I realize I've messed up. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce our bugler, Master Sergeant Beverly Puricchio. Master Sergeant Beverly Puricchio will now honor our fallen comrades with the playing of taps. So if we could go ahead and please stand again to honor our fallen comrades. Thank you, Master Sergeant. Thank you, Master Sergeant, and thank you, everyone, for honoring our fallen veterans, our fallen colleagues. Again, I want to thank Piper Jonathan Bloom, Master Sergeant Beverly Puricchio. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. I want to thank our mixture of the ROTC color guard that performed at the forum tonight, and I know that one of the ROTC commanders, Captain Banky, is here, and I want to just reiterate our pledge as mostly graduate students here to help be mentors to those OCS and ROTC folks at the college, and I hope that you will reach out to us as you need it, sir. Thank you for being here. Thank you. I also want to thank, they're going to be real mad at me for extending time to thank them, but I also want to take some time to thank Center for Public Leadership staff in no particular order except for it's alphabetical. Kathleen Coyle, Lisa Eichenbach, Nancy Howley, Donna Calico, Daniel Katz, Beth Newhall, Jody Sharp, Susan Sivitz, of course, Director David Gergen, and the whole CPL team. Thank you very much for putting tonight together. A couple months of work here, so thank you very much. I'd also like to recognize again Mrs. Adler. Thank you for supporting the Veterans Roundtable this afternoon. I know everybody didn't get a chance to go, but it was a real pleasure hearing from you, seeing your sons here supporting you and your husband. It's really awesome for us to see. And the professors that participated, Professor Lisa Bilmes, Professor Richard McNally, and Professor Cassandra Okachukwa. That's 3 times I've got it right. Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for those folks that are doing great research at Harvard for the veterans. Thank you very much. Last but not least, I want to recognize some of the Student Veterans Planning Committee, although they will also be mad at me for recognizing them. Reagan Turner over here, big dog 2 years ago, passed the mantle to me. Thank you very much. I have big shoes to fill as MC. Dan McConnell you saw, Ashley Musser you saw, Scott Quigley you saw, and last but not least on this list, if you went to the forum, you saw, I'm gonna try to keep it clean. You saw what a BA Dan Feehan was in moderating our panel, and I want a big round of applause for Dan Feehan and what he did tonight for us. If you need to know what BA means, I may or may not be at Tommy Doyle's immediately after this. So, with that being said, I'd like for everybody to please stand as Mr. Blum pipes out our official party. All right, ladies and gentlemen, once again, I've messed up and forgot the benediction, but Father Hare is an awesome dude, and he'll give you a blessing if you walk right outside, I promise. A personal blessing for each and every one of you. I promise. I'll have to get back with him with that. Thanks again for your attendance. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for your patience. I hope that your glasses are no longer charged, and if they still are, finish them, and we'll see you at Tommy Doyle's. Thank you very much.